The story of Abbot Saint Hilarion.
Subscribe to our channel to receive more content like this.
Imagine a time long ago in the rolling hills of ancient Palestine where deserts stretched under the hot sun and people gathered in small villages. Here, in the midst of this rugged land, there was a man who would become known for his deep faith and extraordinary kindness. His name was Hilarion, and his story is one that teaches us about humility, devotion, and the power of a simple life. Hilarion was born into a wealthy family in the town of Majuma, a bustling place near the sea. He grew up like many other boys of his time, comfortable, carefree, and with a good education. But deep inside, Hilarion felt something was missing. He wasn't content with the life of luxury and ease that awaited him. His heart longed for something more, something spiritual. One day, as if guided by a divine hand, Hilarion met a famous monk named Saint Anthony. This meeting would change the course of his life forever. Saint Anthony was known for his intense prayer life and wisdom, and when Hilarion heard him speak, something inside him stirred. He realized that the life he had been living was not the life he was meant to lead. So, at the age of 15, he left his family, his wealth, and his old life behind to follow the path of monasticism, the life of a monk. He traveled to a remote desert in Egypt, far from the distractions of society, and found a small cave to live in. There, he dedicated himself to a life of prayer, fasting, and meditation, seeking to know God in a deeper way. It wasn't easy. The desert was harsh, the sun relentless, and the loneliness overwhelming at times. But Hilarion pressed on, believing that this was the path that would lead him to true peace. As Hilarion's spiritual life grew stronger, so did his reputation. People began hearing about this young man living alone in the desert, and many started seeking him out for guidance. They were drawn to his deep wisdom and his powerful prayers. Hilarion didn't want fame or attention, but he knew that if people came to him seeking help, he could not turn them away. So he began to minister to them, offering counsel, comfort, and prayer. However, living in the desert was still not easy. It was a place where hunger and thirst were constant companions, and temptation was everywhere. Hilarion experienced moments of doubt, moments where the isolation and the struggles seemed too much to bear. But in those moments, he turned to God, and God gave him the strength to carry on. One day, Hilarion found himself facing a serious challenge. A great famine had swept through the land and food became scarce. People were starving, and the once barren desert began to look even more unforgiving. Hilarion, seeing the suffering of those around him, prayed fervently for a miracle. And it happened. His prayers were answered in a miraculous way. Food began to appear, as if from nowhere. Baskets of bread, fish, and fruit arrived, enough to feed everyone who had gathered. But this miracle was not just about the food. It was about something deeper, the power of faith, the way that true devotion could bring God's blessings to others. Hilarion didn't seek the miracle for his own gain. It was always for others, to show them that God cared for them even in their darkest moments. As years passed, Hilarion became more and more known, not just for his miracles, but for his humility and devotion. People came from far and wide to seek his counsel, and many of them stayed, drawn by his way of life. Soon, Hilarion found that his small desert community was growing into something much larger. He had become an abbot, a spiritual leader, overseeing the monks who lived with him. Despite his leadership role, Hilarion remained humble. He continued to live simply, never seeking fame or recognition. He spent his days praying, teaching, and caring for the needs of his fellow monks. He reminded them constantly that true greatness was not found in power or status, but in serving others with love and humility. But Hilarion's heart was torn. As much as he loved his monastic life in the desert, he knew that his mission wasn't over. God had called him to something bigger. So, after many years, Hilarion made a difficult decision. He would leave his desert home and travel to the city of Gaza, where the people there needed to hear his message of faith and hope. It was a move that surprised many of his followers, but Hilarion believed it was what God was calling him to do. In Gaza, Hilarion continued his work, preaching and healing the sick. His presence there became a beacon of light in a city filled with darkness. Though he was now far from the desert that had been his home, his heart remained devoted to God and to the people he served. Even in the busy streets and bustling crowds, Hilarion lived with the same simplicity and love that he had learned in the desert. Hilarion's life was a reflection of the very message he preached, that it wasn't about wealth, fame, or earthly power. It was about serving others, loving God, and living a life of humility. Over time, Hilarion became known as a saint, a model of what it meant to live a life of true faith. And so, Hilarion's story became a story of sacrifice, miracles, and service. He showed us that the most important things in life aren't the material possessions we gather or the status we attain, but the love we give and the faith we hold on to, even in the toughest of times. His legacy lives on, not in grand buildings or monuments, but in the hearts of those who still look to his example for inspiration.